words so confusing, right? I know. Because when I had to read these materials, my master's, and for the PhD, we had to go back through it. Big words, confusing. What are you talking about, right? But then, once you start to step back a little bit and see the macro picture of what it is they're talking about and the social issues that they're kind of getting at, but a lot of times they don't speak directly about them. They speak in code words. What we're going to do tonight is start to break down some of this language, these code words. And a lot of these readings, their code words are talking about one another because they don't always agree. And we're going to see the differences between these theories and how they apply to day-to-day public policy making. All right? Those of you who don't know, as I said earlier, I will record some of these lectures, put them online. YouTube, just put in my name, and it'll come up. Because I know that during this time of year, people get sick. People's kids get sick. Vehicle, transportation, things happen. So when I can do it, I can do it. I know you're paying a lot of money to be here. My goal is to get you the information you need to succeed so you can get in, get the information you need, and get out. Start making an impact. Well, many of you are already making an impact and make a greater impact. All right? And I know that for a lot of people, the recordings help, especially around test time. All right? You can't, when I record, you can't, it doesn't, it's not on you, it's only on me up here. So if you stand up here and say some big words, then you'll be in the video. All right? But otherwise, you won't. All right? So we get started today. All right, good. Drive you crazy, huh?
Yeah, it was.
Okay. All right, I like honesty. All right. Now, public policy, like an onion, a lot of layers. The more you dig into it, there's another layer. All right. What makes you dig into it is your curiosity. Why does this happen? Why do things happen in this fashion? Why was this decision made over this decision? All right? Because in the end, public policy is about who gets what, when, where, and how. Who gets what, when, where, and how. Who gets education? Who gets prison? Who gets health care? Who gets the emergency room? All right? Who gets housing? Who gets jobs? If so, what kind of job? Who gets what, when, where, and how? Because in essence, it's about decision making. Public policy gets at the process of how decisions about society are made. And public policy impacts each and every one of you on a daily basis. How much is the government taking out of your pocketbook before you even see it? How much that train fare costs? How much the tolls for the bridges cost? What is the quality of your drinking water? How many of you drink tap water? Sometimes, some of you can't raise your hand, all right? Because you don't know. All right? You don't know. Drink bottled water, right? Okay, it's about the quality of your water, all right? It's about the cost of electricity. It's about, how many of you have cable? A lot of you, everybody has cable, right? How many of you have satellite? One? One person has satellite? Everybody has cable?
No.
You don't have either?
Nope.
Okay, for those of you who have, premium TV, premium entertainment. Why do you all have cable? Better service? Good, better, right? Better quality. Did you have the choice of getting satellite?
Well, satellite you're referring to like dish?
Yeah, yes, yeah.
Yeah.
An optional. How many of you could not exercise that option? How many of you can only exercise one option? Rules and regulations, policies and procedures.
I don't want to seem like I don't watch TV at all. I think you stream TV like that.
Because you're smart, right? Because you're smart. All right.
$8.99 a month. I'm not trying to act like I don't know what y'all talking about.
We're going to go over some theories tonight. Theories about public policy making. All right? Yeah, these are the theories we're going to address this evening. But they're all theories about public policy. All right? I like to put up this caricature. Does anybody know who they are?
Pinky and the Brain.
Pinky and the Brain. What does Pinky always say? What does the Brain always say?
Tonight we want to take over the world.
What are we going to do tonight?
We're going to take over the world.
Now, instinctively, the reason why you learn about public policy making is because you want to learn about how to impact public policy. You want to learn how to impact your world, the world around you. It could be your organization. It could be your community. It could be your city. It could be your church, religious organization. It could be a whole host of organizations, a whole host of places. But it's your world. If you want to be a player, learning a little bit about public policy making will make you more effective and impactful. But the thing is, public policy making, the theories, they're not neat. They're not clean. They're not always so easy to understand. These are difficult concepts to grasp. But once you do, you have a framework in which to understand how decisions are made. All right? Let's go. Let's start. Rational model. Now, instinctively, this title is catchy. Who's not rational? I'm rational. Are you? All right? There are a couple components to the rational model that are important to understand. Has to be applied to a stable system. What I mean by applied is that in order for you to understand how public agencies function and how decisions are made, you have to look at an agency or a public policy when things are quote-unquote normal. It's business as usual. All right? And it always assumes that for government, when we're talking about government, they are a rational actor. It's always business as usual. Alright? Policy problems are unambiguous. It's clear. We know what we want. We want economic development. We want low crime. We want our streets clean, trash picked up. Right? That's what we all want. There are no limits. Time or cost. Rational. The way, it argues that the way that administrators make policy or create programs is to gather data. What's the issue? What's the challenge? Let's collect data. Learn something about it. Once you gather the data, you pinpoint the problems. What are those challenges? What are the problems? You just choose a preferred, most impactful way to address that problem. Now, in theory, this sounds good, right? Or no? Or you don't know? Sounds good. These are the steps. Gather intelligence, design a course of action, and select a preferred choice. Less cost, maximum impact.
So you choose the less cost and maximum impact.
Yeah. Now,
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
good.
I just repeated what you said.
Oh.
To choose less cost, maximum impact.
Okay. One of the challenges here, to go back to the basis, is that in public policy making, it's very rare for the system to be stable. Things are always changing. Elected officials are changing, placing different demands upon the system. The way that services are delivered are always changing because of technology. Policy problems. Now, in theory, we all know what we want. Clean streets, safe streets, everyone has a job, everyone gets educated, everyone has nice housing, right? We all know that. But the devil's in the details. How do we go about achieving that? And the one challenge here is that no limitations to time or cost. Is that feasible?
No.
Those are the primary constraints in general. Time is the one thing you can't get back. It's a constraint. When something is due, it's due. You don't have 10 years to figure it out. And also, things definitely are not stable over a 10-year time frame, 5-year time. Things are always changing. All right? I say that. The earlier, how many of you know this?
Stratton.
Okay, well, some of you say you've never seen it before. I heard that come out. What about,
Comes on every night at 12.
Ladies and gentlemen, the story you are about to see is true. The names have been changed to protect the innocent. This is the city. Los Angeles, California. I work here. It was due to June 12th in Los Angeles. We were working day one out of our office division. My partner is Frank Street. The boss is Captain Nelson.
yeah.
My name is Frank. The recovery rate of stolen automobiles is not far below normal. Evidence pointing to an underlying gang of car thieves. We have to break it up. already.
You want to?
Just my mother.
Anything else?
No, just us.
Can't be too careful.
What?
Landowners.
Oh,
Yeah, it's only doing the washing. This is through the other. Just caught me out again.
oh,
You know, high class of farm would have an automatic washer. You've done this all that.
sure.
Well, that's pretty good. You want to see me about something, Hill?
Got a couple questions.
I'm none of the fire, aren't I?
Not with us. You still working at the garage?
Night shift. And checking at 4. This got something to do with my job?
I would figure maybe you could give us a hail.
That's the switch. What are you looking for?
A lot of cars going someplace lately. We're trying to find out where and who's driving. Thought maybe you might have heard of them. You got anything?
We're doing good. Goes outside.
We will open the door.
Suppose the 3 people in on it.
What do you know about it?
2 men and a woman. They say the 2 fellas are heavy.
Any names?
No, they're playing the close to the chest. Even the room was not solid. A couple of days ago, I talked to a guy down at the garage. He was telling me about the operations that it would be.
You know people.
Well enough that he tried to get a piece of the action, but they're not coming it up.
So we talked to this guy.
I can't stop.
Okay. One of the things this gentleman is famous for, what does he say?
Facts, ma'am, only facts.
Just the facts, ma'am. Only the facts. I don't want to know the facts. Now, I know it's hard to hear. Speakers, too much bass. I'll figure that out. I'll get them swapped out by next week so we can hear clearly what they're trying to say. But what was happening is he was going to someone's house who he knew is connected to the underworld. Their vehicles being stolen at an alarming rate in the neighborhood. And him being the detective had to go and figure out who was stealing those vehicles. So then he starts going and asking questions to this gentleman. He starts sifting through the information. He's telling him a lot of different things, but he's steering this conversation, saying, I don't want to hear the facts that are related and pertinent to the case that I'm looking at, that I'm working on. So if you want to tell me other things, save that for the psychologist or your friend in the bar. All right? I don't want to hear it. But what I want to hear is what I need to know to solve that case. Just the facts. All right? But as an administrator, when you're looking for facts, what are you relying upon? Sources, data, information, research, all right? But intuitively, you have to know what data, where to get the data from, how to sift through the data to determine what's important and what's not important, all right? And that's the skill. Thank you, darling. That's the skill of an administrator, right? But in that, there has to be some sort of subjectivity. Because first of all, time is a constraint. You got to get something done. You got to show progress. So at some point, you have to make some sort of determination. This is more important than this. I'm going to take this lead. And a lot of it can be gathered by, backed up by facts. But at some point, there's some sort of intuition involved that's based upon your experience. All right? This can be applied to police work. It's applied to case work, working with children, addicts, housing. It's also involved with economic development, education, a whole host of human service, public services that are delivered. All right? Resource and time constraints. amount of staff, equipment, office space. As time goes on, what do you choose to focus on? For the police officer, the stolen cars, burglary, a murder. You have a fixed amount of resources, all right? Somewhere in there, there's decision making. Decision making on what's more vital to our mission, all right? And why am I bringing this up? Because in terms of public policy making, it's not always rational, stable. It's not always a stable system. Things change. Elections happen. Major incidents in the community happen. Things change. All right? That's the context for the article, The Science of Muddling Through. Lindblom, the article that you've read. Now, for some time, the dominant theory of policy that guided administrators was, for the most part, we're all rational. Or administrators, government is always rational. It has unlimited resources, unlimited time. And the decisions that were made was always, quote unquote, best for society. Because they had the resources to gather as much information as they needed. But Lindblom, he says, well, you know, our public agencies and our administrators are good, but I don't know if they're that good. Because I don't know if it's possible. We don't know if it's possible for any agency, any administrator, to always be quote-unquote rational, because what's rational to one individual is not rational to another. I mean, what are some of the issues that we deal with in our society today? Huh? Homelessness?
Unemployment.
Unemployment, poverty, housing,
Social Security. Healthcare. Healthcare. Safety. Public safety.
public safety. All right.
Oh, and environmental issues too, those things what he was talking about in State of the Union.
State of the Union.
Yeah, getting jobs for, a more greener planet, so to speak.
Well, global warming is real. We don't do something soon.
Yeah.
We place ourselves at risk, our entire being. Now, Lindblom developed this model when he was studying the delivery of social services. And in this, he started to argue that human beings aren't rational, are not always rational. And the services that we deliver, so therefore, how can the services that we deliver always be rational? Does anyone here work with substance abuse? One person? If you, for anybody that you see, what do? You develop some sort of service plan. A lot of people follow through with it, right?
No.
No? Why not? It's supposed to be clean, right? And if they follow the plan, their life will be, they'll be liberated, right? Doesn't always work that way. But if the rule of the policy says that if they relapse and they don't follow this plan, policy, this correct way, then they follow the program, or they get some sort of punishment, and so forth and so on, right? They lose something. Sometimes that doesn't always do justice to the issue or the situation. Sometimes it does, but it doesn't always. Homelessness, job training, HIV/AIDS services, K through 12 schools, alternative programs. The list can go on and on and on. All right? But on the one hand, the government has to deliver services in a systematic fashion. Rules and regulations have to apply to everyone equally. But somewhere in there, an individual has to be making decisions. Now, this is also developed in the context of the 1960s. The 1960s were turbulent times. And we developed one of the civil rights, but they developed a whole host of social programs. The war on poverty. Basically, to sum up the heart of this theory, the science of muddling through, in the title, is that governments do not always, they may know where they're going, where they want to go, but it's not always a straight line. And Lindblom argues that instead of taking large leaps and bounds to achieve your goal, or the policy goal, policy objective, you should take incremental, smaller steps to achieving that goal. And you know the direction in which you're going. And the reason is that you can learn from each and every step that you're taking. Because there's always going to be criticism for every new policy that's implemented. But also, government is not all-knowing, all-seeing. There are mistakes that are made. So if you take small steps, you can learn from the mistakes and continue moving in a particular direction. And when I say mistakes, I'm not necessarily talking about outright failure. I'm talking about the ability to enhance the services that are provided, to deal with unforeseen consequences of an action, and to address any challenges that you have to the policy. All right? So instead of public policy being a straight line, Lindblom argues that getting from point A to point B sometimes is very tricky. I think of some of the challenges that we have today in our society. But education, K-12 education. Why can't we have a 90%, 95, 100% graduation rate? About fixing crime in communities throughout New York City.
guess it started from there, between sideways and up, and across and then back down. Is that dissension a sign of?
Sometimes you're going to have to retreat. It's going to be a problem. I mean, let's talk about a public policy issue now. Does anyone know of anything? Or yes?
How about the New York City Police Department?
New York City Police Department, right? Challenges throughout the city, right? Starts off with development. CompStat, right? This really is probably one of the most business-orientated crime-fighting strategies that was developed using statistics and data to figure out where crimes are occurring in the city and to pin it down on a map, and then to deploy your resources to that area. Rationally, that makes sense. All right? And then, underlying theory is that the more contact that you make with people on the streets, the more you know what's going on, and your presence being out there will deter crime from happening once you get control. We developed this stop and frisk throughout New York City. It rises rapidly, and it's heavily concentrated in certain communities that have the crime. All right? And over time, it becomes more about stopping, frisking, and preventing crime, when most of the people who are being stopped and frisked, about 1.2%, actually have a weapon. A knife, less have a gun. 3% have some sort of paraphernalia on them. But we're talking about large numbers of people. So you have this policy, scientific method of addressing crime, all right? But on one hand, you're lowering crime, but on the other hand, you start to do damage to the community relations. So now we get to a point where, yes, the crime is down, but instead of large segments of the community celebrating the crime is down, people are angry. But rationally, people can say, crime is down. We should be happy. All right? We watched on TV a man selling cigarettes. He gets choked to death. He's screaming, "I can't breathe." There's acquittal of the police officer. There's protest. Protest and protest. Then you have these two officers murdered. Cold blood. Someone didn't even live in the city. Took a bus up here. You have the biggest police funerals in the country. And now we're at a situation where there's a lot of tension in the community. Right? With the police to the public, the police to the mayor, and the public to the police. But somewhere in here, the goal of this agency is to still prevent crime, fight crime. So we're at a point, moving forward, how do we fight crime? You get rid of CompStat? You get rid of stopping people? But do you also add some sort of community element? More community relations element. Right? Because the goal was always to bring down crime. And make no mistake about it, crime has been brought down dramatically. Because I was reading the newspaper, that at one point there are about 5 times more murders in New York City than what occurred last year. Murder is murder. And for African Americans and Latino communities, a lot of times people who murder people just like the ones who they murdered. Right? So at some point, lives are being saved. All right? So the goal here, the objective, is not to say that the issue of crime is not being solved. And a lot of work has been done on it, but there's been a lot of missteps, a lot of challenges. Does everybody agree? No. But at some point, we need to move forward. Okay, so with that, I hope I've answered something. Did I address the question? Challenge, right? Yes.
With the concept, those numbers, they don't really report all of the crime categories in the crime stat report. So that the numbers with the crime stat, it's not accurate as far as the population of crime is concerned. So, for example, when we had the rally with the citizens versus the police, with all these rioting and so forth and so on, and the police against the mayor, the crime stat numbers was extremely low. Like there was no crime in New York for about 2-3 weeks because it was unreported. There's a lot of things that are being unreported. So now that the initiative is to work with the mayor from the PEA and the commissioner, now the crime numbers went up. There's a spike in crime all of a sudden, but like 2-3 weeks ago we had like no arrests. And all of a sudden now the crime is up in New York. So
Yeah, silent protest, right?
that's right.
There was a report stating that the PDA was instructed to inform the police not to make any arrests. It's not even bothering them. It's almost like let the crime take on, let the city burn down. That's, quote unquote, that's what they did. Because they were so angry with the mayor, siding with the community, that they said, being that you sided with the community, we're not going to make any arrests. So I don't know how they could accurately make a figure, a number of that data when they know they wasn't making any arrests.
Well, it depends. Some people may have not wanted to do any low-level arrests, but it's not all officers. And all officers don't want to be necessarily involved with the politics between the mayor and the union. A lot of them want to go back to their normal business. Right? '60s. Again, when these policies, especially incrementalism, were developing, on one hand, we sent a man to the moon. That is a phenomenal feat. It shows the creativity, the innovation, and the willpower of this nation to have an idea and to bring it to life. It's 1960s. I mean, listen. That's 60 years from when we first learned how to fly. The Wright brothers got a plane off of the ground. Some people, they may say 60 years is a long time. Well, how long has man been trying to fly? Thousands of years. All right? It's a phenomenal feat. If any of you, I'll say this on the side, if any of you have the opportunity to go to the Natural History Museum, Museum of Science and Technology in Washington, D.C., you should go. Because they have the spacesuits there. They have everything there. All right? It's an amazing story. But you also have our leaders being assassinated. John F. Kennedy in a vehicle in Dallas, Texas. Murdered. Martin Luther King Jr., great civil rights leader, murdered. We have war. We're protesting against the war. So on the one hand, you can say, it can be argued, that government always knows best. from being assassinated. It wouldn't have spent so much time, energy, and resources giving Martin Luther King Jr. such a very, very difficult time. All right? These are challenges of our day. 9/11 sent us to Afghanistan, Iraq, the longest wars this country has had. Elected Obama. We have protests now. Global economy, Great Recession. We have challenges in our time now. All right? Public policy makers about how do we address these challenges. And that was one model right there of, let me go back. Are there any questions about incrementalism? Do we have a grasp of what incrementalism is about? Yes, no, maybe so? Maybe? Yes.
So in the reading, because I was muddling through the reading myself,
Yeah.
it talks about the rational being comprehensive, almost like a blueprint model.
Yes.
So where they talk about clarifying values and objectives, where are the values coming from? Is it that of society or that of the government? Or is it the values of society and the objectives of government that are clashing?
It could be both. Values come from society. The political system will dictate values. The people in power will demonstrate their values. Administrators will demonstrate their values. For the people that are not in power, that are on the street protesting, they also demonstrate their values. And at some point, everyone does not see the world the same way, does not see the way that society should be going the same way. That's a clash of values. And in that, it's very difficult to make the rationalist argument. Because remember, this muddling through is a response to this theory that all governmental actions are rational. If they're rational, so rational, why would people be protesting? I mean, even today, you talk about Ferguson, Missouri, right? The government's actions, in a lot of people's minds, are rational. The actions of the officer, the actions of the courts. Well, a lot of people that are on the streets feel that the action or the outcome was irrational. But a lot of times, some of the things that the people on the streets were doing are irrational. People burning down their own neighborhoods. Right? Is that rational? But what's encapsulated is that a lot of times some things that people do are irrational. Did that answer your question? Maybe. No? Yes?
The previous slide shows something that I wanted to point out. The slide that was just there, the wording, safer to stick with policy.
Yes.
I think that's something that they follow today. People feel more comfortable. They don't like change.
Of course, it's the nature of bureaucracy. Right? It's the nature of human nature. Do what you know, because it's safer and you know what to expect. Right?
So all these policies are being passed down for generations. There's no real room for change.
Exactly. But over time, the system demands change. Because if you keep doing the same thing, you keep reproducing the same thing, right?
No, until something happens is when policies are implemented to be upgraded, changes, or when different people come into administration, like Obama, when he says we need change, or change is his words he used, right?
Yes.
So he's demanding change. But if you have somebody like, say, like before him, Bush, right? He wasn't stressing on change.
He was stressing on change. He was stressing on change from Clinton. You want to change too. Right?
When we look at the point that she said is they stick with the known policy, I think about, this movement we led by Russian see some about the voter registration act. Wouldn't that be kind of like with the conflict between the African American group and President Johnson? Like, we need to vote, to change the policy of voting now. And I remember one part of the movie said, it's not right now. Let's do this first. Let's go here first. Trust me, we'll go here first, and then in time, we will make those changes. But Dr. King was saying, no, it's imperative that we make it now. Would that stick in line with the city to stick with the known policy?
Well, to be honest with you, one of these, you're hitting right directly onto it. Incrementalism is saying take slow, incremental steps to achieve your goals. If you're in power, if things are working for you, of course, you always want to take an incremental approach. Why? Because things are good the way they are. But if the system is not working for you, the incremental approach be taking too long. Dr. King was not using the incremental approach.
The Johnson one, President Johnson.
Yes, when this article was written, there was a note in the 1960s version on the civil rights movement. And it was, he was arguing, incremental approach, you should take little steps, and then at some point you'll achieve your goals. The challenge is, if you've been waiting 100 years to be able to vote, how much longer do you need to wait? All right? One of the things, if you're in power, incremental approach is great. It gives you time. If you're not in power, you need more immediate change. Incremental approach may not be the method in which you should be seeking to utilize. Yes?
I just wanted to say, the lady mentioned Obama being in office and how change, until he got there, it was change. But before he got there had to be a whole series of years of people, the actual president, making a difference to push for change right away, or Obama did not have got there. And that includes the people who represented the reluctance to make changes. It'll happen one day. It doesn't have to happen now, but people made the change now, which is why he was able to get what he did. So it's not always the presidents that we're looking at. It's what came before to make that change. Because even in this college, this was not happening 50 years ago. What we see before us, this class, this congregation, this was not happening 100 years ago. And if you look at the government, and those of us who are on the Senate, including myself, I would not have been on the Senate if 20 years ago, my classroom didn't make a change. And they wanted it now, but it didn't take until 20 years later, which is what you have today. So there was a whole lot of things that went, and people had to make that change.
Good. So, civil rights, right? Voting Rights Act. Without that, you wouldn't have the numbers, people able to vote, right? You don't have political power, then you can't make change. Similar to what you, right?
One thing that Dr. Lee mentioned And because we didn't have the right to vote, we could not be on the jury. So he had to defend his cause and rationalize it to the irrational on the need, the urgent need. At the time, like you said, it has to be a need. And that need was we needed that right in order to protect our well-being. Because our well-being wasn't protected because we didn't have that right. So that's what made Johnson sit back and really rationalize his irrational way of thinking.
Well, I'll say this. When you use the term rational or irrational, it doesn't always fit. Johnson's a politician. He needs to stay in office. When people have objectives, they're going to continue to work to achieve those objectives. I think that's what we really need to focus on. Using the concept of rational and irrational, sometimes it always assumes that one is right and the other is wrong. The challenge is when we live in a very diverse society, ages, race, religion, ways of thinking. If everyone says, I'm right and they're wrong, then we can't get to where we need to be as a society because there's no negotiation. In a democracy, you have to negotiate, because if you don't negotiate, you can never get 50 plus 1. You can never win. All right? Let me keep going right quick. I know you don't want to get out of here, right? We've been talking a little bit. Elite theory. Elite theory says that most key decisions in the community are dominated by a very select few, autonomous few, whose wants are fairly cohesive. This theory, it stratifies society, or classifies society based upon certain stratified classifications. Top 1%, middle class, lower class, working class. The key term is class. It derives from Marxist inclinations. All right? It argues that public policy will always favor the wealthy and dominant in society. It's really started early 1900s. The most famous study in Muncie, Indiana, documented how a small network of business elites in the town were disproportionately influenced by one family, and one way or another had an impact upon the economic lives of most people in the city. I mean, how do you think this happened? How does this work? How can one family or a couple people impact the lives of most people in the town, your city? Money, power, but how do you have money and power?
Do you control the economy?
How do you control the economy?
By purchasing power.
Purchasing power, networks. A lot of times starts out with owning property. Owning the property that the businesses need to move into to operate.
Yes, creating a need.
Creating a need. But sometimes there are basic needs. Alright? When you have a large influence on people's basic needs, then that gives you a lot of clout in the community. Alright? And study, it also articulated or showed how sometimes some of the wealthy or the elites of the community, as they saw it, how they would do benevolent things for benevolent reasons. For example, naming the YMCA by making a donation. Sometimes you get books, libraries, parks, things of that nature. Does anyone know of any examples we have in New York? Famous places? Famous things?
Bridges, highways.
Bridges, highways.
Rockefeller.
Rockefeller Center.
Buying gold.
Carnegie Hall. Alright? Do you think he's donated this money for the greater good of the community? Maybe. But also they wanted their names to live on. When people think of that place, that civic thing that's done, they also want them to think of their name. Great universities. Hospitals. The list goes on and on and on. Chase Bank. Alright? But on one hand, the way our society operates and the way we think, what's wrong with that? I made it. I want these people to know who I am. Alright? It's part of our culture. Alright? Okay. There will be plenty of studies on elite theory and community power that really, the way that they go about proving their assertion is that they trace the networks within an area, whether it's a large city or an area. The wealthiest people, the movers and shakers, and how they intermingle, whether it's through country clubs, through business and social networks, and the like. And in that, they document how some decisions that impact a lot of people's lives are made in the public forum, sometimes not. To break it down and give you more of a clearer example, sometimes public policy making, sometimes politicians or people who are in a political party meet up with prestigious people in the community, either at their office or certain locations, certain restaurants, certain bars, things of that nature, so they can have informal conversations about important issues. All right? Now, there's nothing wrong with that because, on one hand, you have to socialize, that's your job. But what this theory is saying is that 9 times out of 10, public policy is going to be made to favor the elites in society. All right? What they say is that politicians, a lot of times, they may even want to get elected to change things, to make things better. But elites argue that politicians are more like, most of the time, proxies of the elite. Why? Because to get elected, you need money. Most of the time, politicians come from middle class or upper middle class families. In terms of local public policy making, city policy making, elites have the option of either staying put or moving to a different city or a different location. Politicians always have to consider that. concentrate to the high concentration of media ownership. Argue that the top 1% in this country own 42% of the nation's wealth and growing rapidly. 47% of Congress people are millionaires and increasing rapidly. I like the way George Carlin is able to sum it up. Let me see.
Reason. There's a reason. There's a reason for this. There's a reason education sucks. It's the same reason that will never, ever, ever be fixed. It's never going to get any better. Don't look for it. Be happy with what you got. Because the owners of this country don't want that. I'm talking about the real owners now. The big, the wealthy, the real owners, the big, wealthy business interests that control things and make all the important decisions. Forget the politicians. They're irrelevant. The politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything. They own all the important land. They own and control the corporations. As long as it's more than pay for the Senate, the Congress, the state houses, the city halls, they got the judges in their back pockets. And they own all the big media all the big media companies, so they control just about all of the news and information you get to hear. They got you by the balls. They spend billions of dollars every year lobbying to get what they want. Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking. They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. They're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interest. That's right. You know something? They don't want people who are smart enough to sit around the kitchen table and figure out how badly they're getting fucked by a system that threw the whole report 30 fucking years ago. They don't want that. You know what they want? They want obedient workers. Obedient workers. People who are just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork and just dumb enough to passively accept all these increasingly shittier jobs with the lower pay, the longer hours, the reduced benefits, the end of overtime, and the vanishing pension that disappears the minute you go to collect it. And now they're coming for your Social Security money. They want your fucking retirement money. They want it back so they can give it to their criminal friends on Wall Street. You know something? They'll get it. They'll get it all from you sooner or later because they own this fucking place. It's a big club, and you ain't in it. You and I are not in the big club. By the way, it's the same big club they used to beat you over the head with all day long when they tell you what to believe. All day long, beating you over the head in their meetings, telling you what to believe, what to think, and what to buy. The table is tilted, folks. The game is rigged. Nobody seems to notice. Nobody seems to care. Good, honest, hard-working people, white collar, blue collar, doesn't matter what color shirt you have on. Good, honest, hard-working people continue. These are people with honest means. Continue to elect these rich cocksuckers who don't give a fuck about them. They don't give a fuck about you. They don't give a fuck about you. They don't care about you at all. At all. At all. You know?
Amen.
Somewhere, somebody needs to try watching.
I'm 100 years old, and I want to tell the world what I have learned.
That was elite theory of George Carlin. All right? Any questions? Pluralist. Different theory. Elite theory argues that only the very wealthy make all of the decisions in society. All right? Pluralist approach argues against elite theory. Against elite theory. Pluralist approach actually says or argues that any group in society that's adamant about making their voice heard has power to impact public policy making process. They just need to know how to impact the process. So on the one hand, wealthy people, individuals in power, they may know how it may be easier for them to impact the policy-making process because they're closer to it. But pluralists are also arguing that even people, the most marginalized people in society, have power to impact the policy-making process. All right? They just have to be politically savvy enough to understand their political power base and to exercise their quote-unquote agency. The key here is knowing how to impact public opinion. Shaping the public's opinion on how they should view an issue that impacts the group, a group. For some groups, it's easier than others. A little while ago, I was a city planner. In California, there was a litany of laws against sex offenders. They can't live within 300 feet, park, school, certain residences, so forth and so on. So what that does is make it so they cannot live in the city legally. Challenge is that a lot of the people who are registered sex offenders, were released from prison and they didn't have a house to go to, so they lived in these group homes. Where there's about 6 to a house, there's always a caseworker there that's monitoring the individual, substance abuse, jobs, things of that nature. Police chief is looking into this. He's saying, listen, I would rather have them in a place where they can be monitored than for them to be homeless. Because if they're homeless, we can't monitor them. And politically, sex offenders, in society, they have no sympathy. It's very easy to pass laws against individuals where there is no sympathy. No sympathy. Why am I bringing this up right now? To give you an example of the difficulty. Is someone going to sit up here right now and defend the sex offender that's molested children? That's very difficult to do, right? But they're here. My question to you is, can this group that's marginalized unify themselves and fight for laws to protect them? They could. What's going to happen?
It's going to be very difficult. Because like you said, the people on the first of all, they want to have no sympathy for them. So they can exercise their First Amendment right to speak and things like this. But
newspapers going to write stories.
Yeah.
They're going to march, right? There's going to be bigger crowds out there marching, right? What I'm trying to tell you is that on one hand, every group does have some sort of power. I'm not saying that they don't have power, they have legal rights to it. But what I'm saying is, exercise of power for every group in society. There's different, for some, it's more difficult than others. Public opinion is one thing. But you want to know what's even greater? Resources. Resources. Resources to tell people stories. To get on TV, to get on the radio, to be on YouTube, to be on wherever. Because once people hear people's story, it's much more difficult to hate. And this is something that really comes in when we talk about multicultural societies. Now, in the United States, we have challenges. But you travel around the world, and there's some great challenges. All right? But the main thing here, pluralism. Power is decentralized, and every group has power. Now, the power of pluralism is the ability to network with other groups that are like-minded so that you can impact the public policy making process. And in a democracy, you need a majority. So if you have 49% of the votes and your opponent has 51.1 or 50.1, they win. You lose. The goal is 50.01, I guess. It's the only way you're going to have a majority, right? The reason why I say this is that pluralism, you have to impact public opinion, and you have to make alliances. What that does is force any organization trying to do anything to the middle of people's conscience. Extreme parties or ideas, they catch headlines, but they typically do not get you a majority, unless there's public support, public sympathy for extreme ideas. All right? An example I would say is Arizona law. If you're an immigrant, or if you look like an immigrant, police officer can stop you and say, "Where are your papers?" All right? I mean, that's extreme. There's a majority there. Said no. Luckily, it was overturned. Robert Dahl wrote the article Who Governs, which is pluralist, as a rejection, as a response, and rejection to elite theory. He argued that elite theory, it starts off with a premise that elites always rule, and it seeks to prove that premise. They're always looking to prove that the elites always impact public policy making. He carried out a study in New Haven, Connecticut, that focused on urban redevelopment, public education, and the political nomination process by studying the local government of New Haven. All right? Does anyone know where New Haven is? Connecticut. What university is that?
Yale.
Yale, right? Okay. Professor at Yale. All right. This was a very sound an extensive research methodology. They interviewed or re-interviewed about 46 people who were involved in the policymaking process, council people, developers, administrators. They sent questionnaires to 1,063 people in the community, asking them about their participation in the policymaking process, in the community, so forth and so on. They did 286 follow-up interviews, qualitative and quantitative research, and spent 1 year in City Hall. This research gave a full understanding of how policy is made within the city. How are decisions made in relation to urban development, public education, political nominations? All right? Findings over the past 2 centuries, that's 200 years. New Haven gradually changed from oligarchy to pluralism. What's an oligarchy? Few people rule. Few people rule. All right? Pluralism. The pluralist city is stratified as other places, but a small strata of individuals who are much more involved in political process and discussion, are more active and have more of an influence than the majority of the population. Only a small amount of people have much direct influence, but some citizens have moderate impact upon public policy making. Now, I go over all this because to me, working in local government, it seems like the way, for what I know, how local government works. He argues from this that it's pluralism, that it's a pluralist society. If people want to have an impact, they can. But he also admits that very few people, very few individuals, have a lot of influence, more influence than most. So, as a student who wants to impact public policy, what does that tell you? What does it tell you? Figure out who impacts the public policy, figure out who has the power, and figure out how to impact their decision making. On one hand, you can take the theory and say, you know what, I'm empowered. And we go out here, stand on this corner with my sign, and let everybody know what's going on. Sometimes people pass you by, sometimes people may be sympathetic. Some would argue, you're doing a great thing. Some will argue, what you need to be doing is figure out who makes the decision on this issue, and you need to be spending your time getting at this person or these individuals. Okay. The method that pluralists use to achieve objectives is at first, you have an interest. You have to find like-minded individuals, groups, organizations. Either you're unified because you care about an issue, you're unified for some reason or another, or you can build a relationship. I help you, you help me. And together, you're stronger on pressing your demands on government. And the more and more more individuals or groups that band together, the stronger and louder your voice is. Because in pluralism, individuals don't matter. Politics, in general, is an extension of group power. As an individual, you don't matter because you are not 50 plus 1. Can't win an election. You don't have enough voice to influence the policymaking process. Politics is an equilibrium between groups in society. All right? Using this theory, strategy is the network. Build a coalition. If you build a coalition, you can work together, you can achieve something great. Do any of you belong to a union? Raise your hands. Okay, quite a few of you. Quite a few of you. Have any of you ever called in sick? Okay. You're not on camera, I got it. United, you're strong. Divided, you fall. It's simple. It's game theory, right? As an individual, you're dealing with the person who has all the knowledge. It's information asymmetry. The center, the employer, individuals in power, they have all the information to make the decision. The only way that you will come out optimally is if you trust each other. Show solidarity. Now the unions were a major, they were instrumental in improving labor rights, getting people time off, health care, improved wages, protection at work, so forth and so on. But what's been happening over the last couple of decades, protected labor, or unionized labor, has been under attack. Alright? Alright, we can go into that later on. Are there any more questions about pluralism? Okay. So now you're starting to grasp a couple of these theories and concepts. Some go together, some they clash, they conflict. Alright? And the thing is, none of these are completely foreign to anyone in here. We've all heard a little bit something about elite theory. This country, it's in the strain of our country. We've all heard something about pluralism. It's in the strain, I'll say not the strain, the vein of our country. The way that we think, the way that we talk. It's in our movies, all right? It's in our music, it's in our politics. Alright? Muddling through. Nobody necessarily admits that we don't know what we're doing. And we're just going to go down the direction and do what's best at whatever particular point in time. But sometimes we can see that clearly. Alright? Growth machines. Now, growth machines is based upon elite theory. But they add more individuals, and the elites are a more diffuse group. Now, growth machines really is looking at urban development, especially in big cities, like New York, Chicago, Washington, D.C. Right? And the way that redevelopment is carried out, and power is carried out in society. The central premise here is that organized forces in society work together to push through urban redevelopment projects. And it's done in the name of urban development, which is in theory good for everyone. But in practice, there are losers. Not everyone benefits from urban development. In theory, everyone should benefit, but there are winners and there are losers. It doesn't necessarily have to be that way, but for the most part, it is. And they argue that a lot of times the losers are the original inhabitants of an area that's newly redeveloped. Elites, developers, bankers, utility companies, universities, special sports clubs, organized and powerful interest in an area, in a city. And their power is based upon their ability to force development projects through by exercising their power to influence decision makers, policy decision makers. And the reason why there are these groups are always trying to push through redevelopment projects is because this is how they make their money. This is how they increase the value of property. Piece of property here, you can have a couple of houses right here, or you can build a high-rise building. 2, 3, 4, 5. Increase value, increase money for a city, and it's increased tax revenues. All right? This is 125th Street. Huh? What's argued is that a lot of times when redevelopment goes through, or new buildings, the challenge is that they're too expensive for the original inhabitants who live in the area to move into the new buildings. But that's not the kicker. The kicker is it pushes up the rents for everyone else. So over time, people have to move. So a lot of times, individuals that live there, they can't necessarily enjoy all the benefits. But it's a mixed bag. At the heart of this, of what Malak is arguing, is that urban redevelopment, what it does is take life chances away from many of the original inhabitants of areas that experience rapid urban development or urban redevelopment. And what I mean by life chances is this. It could have been an area. A lot of times, urban redevelopment projects target areas that are close to the central city. And it may not be the nicest, best area, but it's close to the job, the central labor market, the job market. Infrastructure, trains, highways, things of that nature. Typically, these areas are located near them. And there are other benefits associated with by being in the central city. Now, what happens when an area is redeveloped and the prices go up, typically to afford the same, pay the same rents, to enjoy the same quality of housing, individuals have to move outside of the city to further out areas. to the suburbs. Sometimes wealthy places, sometimes not. The challenge is transportation costs increase. Either you're paying more for the train if it goes there, most of the time no. So you have to find other means of transportation. It takes longer. Your access to jobs is less because most of the jobs in an area tend to be concentrated. You see, Mullet wrote this in the 1970s. There's a lot of urban revitalization going. But one thing that people in New York know is gentrification, urban revitalization is alive and well now. Harlem is one thing. Brooklyn is another. It's a massive scale. Queens, in various places throughout New York City, they're a nice neighborhood. Sometimes they struggle with something. Sometimes they're not that nice. All right? People live there. It's their homes. You see these average or regular places. All right? Then they cost money because New York City is not cheap. They see these massive high-rises right next to them. All right? But one of the things that Mullet is getting at is that before urban redevelopment takes place, it has to go through a public policy process. Decisions have to be made. The planning has to be approved through the public policy process. Infrastructure has to be placed into the ground. That is a public policy process. Deciding where infrastructure investment goes is deciding who's going to be able to make a fortune this year or the next year, because that influences the size and type of construction that can go onto a site. All right? Are there any questions?
So all of this is based on the Google machine?
Yeah, what I just said. From this slide right here. Yeah, there's different public policy ways of viewing public policy. All right?
Did you consider a Hasidic community, urban community?
You're talking about Brooklyn?
Wherever the Hasidic people are in New York.
Yeah.
So how come those areas can't really get gentrified? Because I don't see them going on.
Okay, well, I would say this. If you have a group of individuals that are unified, right?
They were just powerless to a certain extent, but they were unified. I believe.
What I'm saying is this. I'm not saying that people in Harlem are not unified, and I'm not saying that the Hasidic Jews in Brooklyn are completely unified. I don't know. But what I do know is this, is that any area, before changes are made, there's a policy-making process. Now, your ability to influence that policy-making process, that's dependent upon a few factors. First of all, understanding the process, and then knowing how to impact it, and being able to influence those key decision makers when the decision is done. What you can do, is what would be a good thing, is take some of these theories and use them as a framework to compare the two communities. Because in the end, public policy making is about who gets what, when, where, and how. And it's also being able to impact policy making process. All right? Regime theory. The Stone. This is first written in 1989 about the governance of Atlanta, Georgia, from 1946 to 1988. The man you see there is Andrew Young, the first African American mayor. I don't know what happened there, but I'll figure it out. All right. What this study was really trying to get at is how Atlanta started off as one of the most segregated cities in the United States, transitioned to having an African American mayor, and from that point was able to develop a large African American middle class, which at this point in time was an exception, not the rule. What Stone did was describe how Atlanta's downtown business interests worked with African American politicians and developed some sort of a network and arrangement that on one hand allowed the city to back financing for infrastructure and projects so that Atlanta's downtown can grow. But on the other hand, a lot of African American politicians, the top ones in Atlanta, pushed the downtown business interest to hire African Americans into middle class jobs and positions. And this relationship of public investment in infrastructure and growth of business worked to expand, first of all, economic vitality of the city, but also was a model, or is a model that was developed on how African American political power can be translated into economic, social economic power. This theory argues that in order for an individual to have power to influence the public policy making process, you either have to have political power, be elected, or have financial power, be an elite. And if an arrangement can be made to support one another, then the city, the community will develop. But if political power does not work with the business interest in the city, political power is only political power. It cannot translate into better living conditions, especially for minority communities. Pluralism. The difference between regime theory and pluralism is that governments are only driven to really deal with those who have financial resources or the necessary resources to allow that government or the people in government to achieve their means. And it works both ways. Big business will not support those in government or individuals in government if they're not supporting the expansion of business. Pluralism, everyone has power. You just have to know how to exercise it. Regime theory, the only groups that have power are those who have resources. Either financial resources or political power. Otherwise, you're left out in the cold and snow. All right? Okay. I've covered quite a bit of theories this evening. And if they're still a little fuzzy for you, that's okay. Just keep going over them. All right? And what you really get out of here for this evening is to know that there are different ways of looking at the policy-making process. But by looking at the various ways, you can help figure out how you can impact the policy-making process. Many of you saw a theory tonight and said, yeah, that makes sense. But that one, I don't like that one. No, I don't believe that that's true. Find 2 of these. Learn them all because you're going to have to take a test. But find 2 of these to really, really, really sink your teeth into. And start looking at your own field. Whatever policy issue it is that you wrote to me about in the first class, you say, okay, this is the policy issue. How do things work? How are laws actually made? How are the policies administrated and carried out? How is policy made? When you start asking these questions, you start peeling back an onion. Now, none of these theories are absolute. They're just guidance. They're frameworks for you to use. But at some point, you would choose 2 or 3. Some of you should go further. You subscribe to 1. But knowing them all will make you much more powerful because you have more tools in which to address your opponents. What I mean by opponents is because at some point when you start to move up, you'll realize that everyone does not agree. Does not see the world the way you do. And once you realize that, you'll realize how important it is to know and understand how to impact the public policy making process. Because if you don't know, the decisions are going to be made and you're going to wonder what just happened. How did it just happen? Some people are going to walk out there smiling. Some people are going to go back to the desk and go like that. Some people are going to go home and cry. All right? You know what happened, even if it doesn't go your way. You understand it, and you learn from it. All right? Was there a hand up here?
I did have one question. It was basically, are we supposed to kind of do a theory that we relate to, that one that we feel is correct or accurate in our own public policy issues, or are we supposed to kind of choose a theory that we wish to see happen, or we want to see happen?
No, you're going to find a theory that you believe this is actually the way that our society functions.
Okay.
And right now, you're still developing. We're going to go over a couple more models next time. All right? Just give you a flavor, the complexity of public policy making. Once you get this, you can start applying these theories. All right?
Do you have the book?
Yeah, I have the readers up here. You can come right now. Yes, I got you.
You got me?
Whichever way you want. And you can actually cut it out from the. How are you?
I'm good.
How do you?
I'm good. How are you? I just got the rest of the meat.
It was an accident.
How did you do?
Dealing with this weather. No, but I mean, it's snow and walking and all that stuff. Oh, this is
Since it was snowed in last week, what's on the syllabus for tonight will be for next week, and I'm going to try to catch up next week. Okay? Just read the next two readings. All right? Yeah.
This time.
It did not work?
I got it. Because I came back as I'm delivered with people or something, and then I'll show you that. Yeah. It came back to me as Hollywood. I understand it. And then yours showed up.
Yeah.